I'm going to just go on mute so you can get other people online.
Okay, everybody should be coming online. I've got it recording now, so anybody that comes on, we'll just let them know that.
Wait. Okay.
Jason Allen
has joined the conference.
Hi, Jason.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Excellent, thank you very much.
I just wanted to let you know we can hear you and that everything's being recorded today.
Okay.
Just so you know when if you're asking questions or anything, okay?
Excellent, thank you.
Donald Lennart
has joined the conference.
Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. How many people are you expecting?
Between 40 and 50 today.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, we have a pretty good turnout expected, so it may take us a couple minutes longer than we're thinking to get started just to make sure everybody signs on, but
No worries.
I'm hoping we can get started within a couple minutes here.
Okay.
Efficiency Nova Scotia
has joined the conference.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. We're going to just get started in a couple minutes, okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Dan Soske
has joined the conference.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Pretty good.
We're just going to be a couple more minutes here, okay?
No problem. We're going to have a couple more people here from Kellogg's joining in as well.
Okay, perfect.
Dave Eastham
has joined the conference.
Hi, Dave.
Good morning, or afternoon, depending on your time zone.
Yeah, afternoon for us here, but morning for you still. We're just going to be a couple more minutes, okay?
Well, yes, I just like to be on time.
Yes, we do appreciate that.
Sarah Hayes
has joined the conference.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. Is that Lisa?
It is Lisa. We're just waiting on a few more people here.
Okay.
Robert Hunt
has joined the conference.
Hello, Robert.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, living the dream.
We're just going to be a couple more minutes, everyone. We're still waiting on a few people here.
Todd
has joined the conference.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Just a few more minutes, everybody. Pardon me?
Am I the only one?
Oh, no, there's lots on here. We're just waiting for a few more, so we're going to give them another minute or two, and then we'll get started.
Sure.
Everyone can hear me. We're going to take about another 2 minutes. Just wait for any stragglers to come on in, and then we'll get started here so that we're not holding anybody up too far. So we'll go through a few housekeeping things to begin, and then we'll jump right into the presentation.
Pat at C3
has joined the conference.
Hello.
Hi. Hi there.
We're just going to take another minute or two and then get started, okay?
Great.
Natural Resources
has joined the conference.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thanks for coming. We're going to just take one more minute, and then we're going to get started, okay?
Okay. We're having a lot of trouble logging on, even though I had no problem yesterday.
Oh, dear. Onto the computer or obviously not the telephone?
Or was it working now?
It seems to be working. We have a please stand
It says, please wait. Conference has not yet been started by the host.
Nope, it has started. You guys should be able to see it. It should come up as a roadmap to energy excellence as the front screen right now.
Uh-oh.
Did you allowed pop-ups and everything, right?
I think so.
Yeah, we went to
We're in our boardroom. I don't know what this computer does. Oh, you know what? I spelled my name. Hang on.
Well, no,
no.
I don't think that's it.
No, it is.
I went to the main page instead of the link that they provided.
No. code.
Has joined the conference.
No, it's not. All we get is provider code not found in the posted data.
Sorry, what did it say?
Provider code not found in the posted data.
Did you try the same access code that you used for the telephone, 898-5123?
Has joined the conference.
Yep.
Because that should work. Oh dear.
Now I can't even get out of this.
Okay, and you guys went to the Clarity Conferencing website onto the web conferencing part?
Well, we're typing in the address that you provided in the email.
Yep.
We'll try again.
Okay.
Sorry to hold up things for our.
That's all right. We were hoping that.
Just select it, put them out. Just go down and press enter.
Has joined the conference.
Hello.
What if I say no to this?
No, you have to say it.
What?
It's saying, that was delivered. Okay, go no, yeah.
Is there anyone else that's online right now on the telephone that's having issues with getting it up and online on their computer? No? I'm going to take that as a no.
Well, the screen we have has a guest login and a host login.
Right. You signed in as the guest?
Yeah. So I have to tell you what, I'll try giving you all the information.
No, I think it might have been that security issue on the left.
Email. Try this. Oh, pop-up block.
Allow pop. Always off pop-up. Why is the first one?
Okay, so while you guys are working on that, I'm going to go through some of the housekeeping stuff now with everyone, and hopefully by the time we get through that, you'll be able to see the presentation then.
Okay, we have it. We're just going to go on mute for this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so my name is Lisa Border. I'm the program manager here at 360 Energy, one of many, and I'm going to just be overseeing the presentation today, kind of coordinating everyone here. So what we'll ask is that everybody mute their phone lines unless you are speaking. So that's *6 to mute, and if you have a question or if you need to mention something to us, could you please press #6 to unmute? You may want to write that down for the duration of the conference call. We will be accepting questions at the end of the presentation. So you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen, there are 3 little tabs. One has a little person, one has a hand, and one has a little talking bubble. That's where you can place your questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation, either for Sarah or for Dave there. So if you don't mind holding them to the end, that would be great. And, of course, if you have questions afterwards, feel free to send them over to us as well, okay? So I am going to turn things over now to David Arkell from 360 Energy.
Well, good morning to the people in the West and good afternoon to our Eastern friends. I want to, first of all, do a quick introduction on this whole journey towards energy excellence. And the process we're going to be discussing at a very high level is when we're looking at this excellence model, it's not only looking at usage, but also looking at pricing and managing that collectively and dovetailing both those issues. So certainly that's an area that we're encouraging customers to look at. Next slide, please, Lisa. As far as our model, I just want to bring to everyone's attention what we use as experts and best practices from around the world. We have a variety of people involved from Europe and the United States as well. So something that we're going to discuss at the end of this is that we'll continue holding these webinars perhaps every 2 months to talk about what best practices can be done and have been done by different organizations. It just so happens I'm at St. Mary's Cement in Bowmanville today, which people may be
Natural Resources
has left the conference.
Which people may be aware of. So they'll be speaking about their journey that they took in November. Next slide, please, Lisa. Now this journey it takes time. This is not a project. It's an ongoing process, and what we've found is most customers, about 80% of them, treat energy or energy management as a project. People like St. Mary's have a continuous process where they're always looking at and refining what they can do and how they can improve managing energy. And from our experience with St. Mary's and others, there's significant savings that can be achieved, up to 25 to 35% annual savings if people treat energy as a controllable cost.
Has joined the conference.
Next slide. So in this whole discussion here, we thought it would be really helpful for everyone to understand where Canada is and ultimately where it could be, but to learn what we're doing well and what we could do more effectively. And we couldn't think of anyone better to speak about that than the ACEEE. And so, Lisa, I'll hand that over to you so you can make introductions to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Dave.
Jeff Hardy
has joined the conference.
So Sarah Hayes is going to be our presenter today. She is the Senior Policy and Utilities Associate for ACEEE. I'm going to ask her to unmute her line now and come on and go through some of her slides with us today.
Thanks, Lisa. Can you hear me all right?
We can. Thank you.
Great. We can just dive right in here. What I'm going to talk about today is a report that we published a few weeks ago, ranking countries on their energy efficiency. This first slide just tells you a little bit about my organization in case you're not familiar with us, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. We're a nonprofit. We focus exclusively on energy efficiency, and there's some general information there that you can take a look at later if you're interested. Next slide, please. So the report that I mentioned is the International Energy Efficiency Scorecard, and it's the first time that we've done this report. We have, for the last 6 or 7 years, done a state scorecard that ranks all 50 U.S. states on where they are in energy efficiency. But this is the first time we've done this in an international capacity. It's a research report, and the purpose was to identify at kind of a high level, as I'm sure everybody on the line is aware, there's not really a single perfect way to measure energy efficiency on an economy-wide basis. And so we were trying to get a big picture really comprehensively across a lot of sectors to give us some indication of how countries are doing. And the first part of the report ranks all the countries, and the second, there's a piece on the end that looks at U.S. historical performance, which I'm not going to focus on today. But we're a primarily U.S.-focused organization, so part of the purpose for us was to get a sense of how the U.S. has been doing and how it currently fares as compared to other countries. The rankings are based on 100 possible points. we looked at 27 different measurements or metrics, and the points are divided across 4 major categories. So the first category, national efforts, is a kind of cross-cutting policies or measurements, and then the remaining 3 are the 3 areas primarily responsible for energy consumption in a developed nation, and that's building, industry, and transportation. Next slide, please. So we just don't have enough time for me to go into detail about all 27 different metrics, but this is the slide that lets you know what they are, as well as the maximum possible score for each metric. Just a quick glance at some of the key things to take away from this are these metrics, as listed here, are divided by these 4 categories that I mentioned. So you can see that out of 100 possible points, we assign 25 to the national efforts, those cross-cutting measurements. The remaining 3, buildings, industry, and transportation, those points are assigned based on a weighted average of energy consumption by sector for all 12 economies that we looked at. And the other thing to kind of take away here, well, maybe 2 other things. Once you divide 100 points by 27 different things, there's not one single thing that's going to be the determinative factor. So that was our goal, was to get a really kind of comprehensive and cross-cutting look. The other thing to notice here is that some of the metrics are measurements of like energy productivity. That's a number that we can find. And some are policies. So things that encourage energy efficiency or remove barriers to investment in energy efficiency. So like the mandatory energy savings goals. That is a yes or no question that we asked. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned, we included 12 of the world's largest economies. This group shifts as economies change, so that was as of late 2011. And in the top 12 would have been India, but we excluded India because we couldn't get the data that we needed. Data was a real challenge. I didn't include a slide about this, but as you can imagine, collecting data that is comparable across countries is challenging to start with. Trying to find data that is consistently reported in the same way by each country and that is also current is very challenging. So that was definitely something that we had to work with and around. The 12 economies that are included represent 78% of global gross domestic product, 63% of global energy consumption, and 62% of carbon CO2 equivalent emissions. So even though it's just 12, it's quite a big chunk of what's happening in the world. Next slide, please. So this is the list of the 12 economies that we looked at. And I keep saying economies instead of countries because, as you can see, we have 4 European countries listed: Italy, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. And then we also have the EU listed separately. And the way first of all, the reason we did that was because there's 4 European countries, each alone are in the top 12 largest GDPs in the world. But we were looking for something comparable to the U.S., and the EU is in many ways more comparable than, say, Italy on its own. Also, the EU represents quite a lot more in terms of what's going on, both in differences in climate, in differences in approach to policies, in levels of development and types of industry. So they really do paint different pictures, and we wanted to try to be as inclusive as we could there. You can see we also have China, Russia, Brazil, Australia, Japan, and of course Canada. Next slide, please. So the approach that we took was we started by consulting experts in these areas. So because we have worked so long and so specifically in this field, we have relationships with a lot of folks, and some we just had to reach out to kind of because we knew of them. And we asked them, what are the measurements that we should be taking? What are the questions that we should be asking that will give us a good picture of energy efficiency on an economy-wide basis? From those consultations, we developed a list of metrics for each of the categories that I mentioned. Then we went out and collected the data. When possible, we used data from a centralized resource, such as United Nations data, OECD, any of the kind of aggregators of global data that the idea was that it would be more likely to be consistent than trying to find it individually in each country. And in cases where that data is not available from a larger internationally recognized source, then we did go to each country and find it ourselves. We had a team of researchers on staff, and once we compiled the results, we sent that information to in-country experts to get feedback on what we were finding, and that process, while we did get quite a bit of feedback, something on both of these steps that I hope we can improve in the next version is, this was an unheard of report. So while we certainly got feedback and participation, what we've seen in the state scorecard is once people recognize what this is and know how it's going to be used, you'll get a lot more engagement. And engagement by people in country, I think, will help us a lot to get more, to improve data and get more detailed and better information. And then once the report was written, we had both subject matter and in-country experts peer review the document prior to publication. Next slide, please. So I think I've already mentioned some of these, but I just wanted to highlight some of the data limitations with an exercise like this. As I said, there's no single perfect measure of energy efficiency. We picked 27 different measures, and while we got a lot of feedback to identify what those should be, they're imperfect. There's lots of arguments that could be made about why we should have picked a 28th or 29th, or why we should have left something out. Really what these do is provide a high-level snapshot of what's going on economy-wide. My second bullet there talks about differences in countries. There's some really significant differences in countries that are going to absolutely impact the measurements that we took. And things like how spread out a country's population is, how big or small the population is, the temperatures in the country, the types of industry in the country, all those things are going to have big impact. And we did attempt to mitigate these impacts or these variables on our results, but it's not something that is simple and straightforward and can easily be removed. It's a pretty complicated thing, and there's a lot of factors that can impact these results. So that is also something that we look forward to improving as we move forward and people identify either something we missed or a way that we could do this better. And I already talked about this, some of the data challenges. Yeah, I think I've already said what I want to say on that. Next slide, please. So on to the results. What this slide shows you is it's stacking up the totals in each category. So the first kind of lightest blue that's closest to the left is the national scores, and then the dark blue is buildings, then there's industry and transportation. These are total points, so countries are given ranks in order, 1 through 12, but they're also given points. So out of the 27 metrics, there's 100 possible points in each metric. You can earn something like 2 to 8 points depending on the metric. And so you have ranks and totals, and this is totals. This is based on points. And they're listed in order of total scores. So as you can see, the United Kingdom had the highest score. and Canada came in 11th. What I think this graph really tells you overall about the countries is that there's a huge amount of room for improvement across all countries. And what I think really makes this clear is to understand that in each metric, we weren't giving the highest score based on an ideal or an arbitrary place that we thought countries should be. We were basing the highest score on what's actually in practice in these 12 economies. So the highest score in each metric actually went to at least one country and often more than one, meaning that 100 points is it's attainable. Some of these things, again, like energy intensity of industry, if you're China, it might not be possible for you to be number one, and that's because you have really energy-intensive industrial processes going on there. But you certainly could get a lot closer to 100 than where you are, and that's part of the benefit of doing the 27 metrics that are so broad and cross-cutting. Next slide. This is another way to look at the results, and this map emphasizes rank. The green countries on the map are the highest scoring countries. They're in the top tier of countries. Yellow is the middle tier, and red is the lowest scoring countries. The boxes tell you overall rank, which is in the upper right in the box. So if you find the box for Canada, your overall rank is 11. And then the little flag represents national effort, and Canada ranked 8th in national effort. Each of the little icons in that box are one of the 4 categories that I mentioned. So right below the little flag is a building. Canada ranked 11th in buildings. On the kind of diagonal and above buildings is industry. And Canada ranked 10th for industry. And then the bottom right corner is a little car for transportation, where Canada ranked 11th. Next slide, please. And these graphics just show you, or tables just show you the scores and ranks. So in some cases, if you can skip to the bottom right, the chart for transportation, you can see that even though, oh wow, that's neat, thank you. Even though there's only a 1-point difference between the UK and EU, the rankings go from 1st to 5th because there's a 4-way tie for first place. And so it's really, I think, useful and important to consider both ranks and scores in each of the categories to get a complete picture of what's going on. So to go to walk through this from the top left, those are the total scores and ranks. Canada came in 11th, and they scored just 1 point above Russia, which was 12th. There's a little bit of a gap between Brazil and a 10-point gap between Canada and the United States. What I think is interesting here is kind of how tight the pack is for the middle tier. There's a 3-way tie with 56 points in 6th place. Those middle tier countries didn't score the same or close to the same in each category, but overall their big picture is exactly the same out of 100 possible points. And then the United Kingdom and Germany are in 1st and 2nd, very close in scores, and then in 2nd and 3rd are Italy and Japan. I'm not going to walk through each of these, but they are available in the presentation. So if you want to kind of look at ranks versus scores for each of these areas, I will walk through Canada for each. Let's see, in the national efforts, as I said, Canada ranked 8th. They scored 12 out of 25 possible points. In buildings, Canada got 11th, scoring 9 out of 28 possible points. So we'll talk about that a little later, but that's clearly an area where there could probably be a lot of improvement made. And that's in real contrast to China. China blew everybody away in this category. They scored 23 out of 28 possible points, which is really impressive. In the industry section, Canada, it's ranked 10th, but actually it's lowest scoring in a tie with Russia and China. And then in transportation, it's 11th and scores 2 points ahead of the United States and 1 point below Australia. Next slide, please. So some major themes that are kind of teased out for the overall results. There are some big gaps between countries. I just highlighted China in the buildings area is doing much better in a lot of ways than other countries. No country did great in every area. If you go back and look at that map later, China does excellent in 2 areas and terribly in 2 areas. And I think that's really interesting and illuminating about where countries are focusing their efforts and where there's areas for big improvement. So I did talk about data already, but what I also want to mention is that so most of this data is around 2009, 2010, because that's about as recently as you can get it reported for, reported and then vetted and then made public on a kind of international scale. And so that means that new policies that countries have adopted in the last couple of years are not necessarily going to be reflected here. And we're already seeing quite a lot of changes that will show up the next time we do this. China is one example. In the last couple of years, they've adopted even more really aggressive policies to encourage energy efficiency, and we think that that will probably move them up next time we do this. And the biggest takeaway, I think, is on that earlier slide that I showed, that there's lots of room for improvement in all of the countries. I said this already, that the highest score was awarded for the best country in each metric, country or countries in each metric. And in spite of that, the highest possible score was just 67 out of 100, and the average score was 54. So lots of room for improvement everywhere. Next slide, please. So I wanted to pick out a few selected results for Canada. As I said, there's just not time to go into all 27, but it's all available in the report, which is free on our website. Canada is in the middle tier of economies, ranking 8th overall in the national efforts section. That was the best section for Canada, in large part because of the policies that have been adopted at the national level. So what I did here, well, I'll start with energy productivity. Out of 4 possible points, Canada scored 1. It scored pretty low compared to other countries. Japan and the UK each scored 4. I think on the next slide there's a little more detail about that. In the policies, so what I did here was, it wasn't 5 points for a single metric. I added up the metrics looking at policies and totaled them. So in the policies that we measured on the national efforts category, we looked at whether or not there was an energy savings goal in place and whether tax credits and loan programs were made available across multiple sectors to encourage energy efficiency. And Canada got a perfect score there. While there isn't a national energy efficiency goal in place, the territories and provinces have committed, I think all of them.
Has left the conference.
I think all of them. We give credit for a majority, but if I recall correctly, there have been commitments made across the nation in Canada. So those are things that areas where Canada really stands out as having done well and being an international leader. Investment in energy efficiency. The investment in energy efficiency is a really hard metric to collect data for. So we combine that with energy efficiency R&D investment, and that is something that I IEA puts out, and 2 out of 8, it could be improved. Australia and Germany have really high overall spending, and Australia and the U.S. have high energy efficiency R&D spending. And what's going on in Australia is just in the last couple of years, they've committed a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of investment and spending to improving their energy efficiency, and it has made a difference in where they are as compared to the rest of the country. Can we go to the next slide? So this is the information I was referring to, getting a little more detail about energy productivity. This is looking at dollars, U.S. dollars of gross domestic product per energy consumption, and energy consumption is measured in tons of oil equivalent. And I'm not going to read through all the numbers, but you can see these are ranked in order. And Canada does better than China and Russia, but quite a bit far off from where Japan and the UK are at. And then mandatory energy savings goals. This was a yes-no that we asked, and I listed that just so that you could get a sense of this is really common policy. There's a lot of countries that are doing this. And even some of the countries that have no, Australia and Brazil have a no, they are committing to greenhouse gas reduction. So if it didn't have a specific energy efficiency component, we didn't count it. But the United States is the only country that has neither on a national scale. Next slide, please. So in the buildings category, energy use in buildings, the score was 2 out of 10 possible points. And this actually covers 2 categories because we looked at residential and commercial buildings. This is an area that could be improved a lot. And when we got feedback, actually it wasn't feedback to us, there were some articles written about the report in Canada, and there was a lot of commentary speculating that perhaps the reason for this was because of colder temperatures in Canada. And certainly differences in climate, as I said, will affect the results, but in this case, we used heating and cooling degree days to adjust the results so that countries that had more heating and cooling degree days, those differences were mitigated. There's a graphic on the next slide that will illustrate that a little bit better, but I have put it here. So Germany scored high for commercial buildings, and Russia scored higher than Canada for commercial buildings. I listed those because they are cold countries. China scored a perfect 10 in both categories, which is odd. Most countries did well in either commercial buildings or residential buildings, but China did exceptionally well in both. Building codes is also an area where there could be a lot of improvement in Canada, and something that is likely to also be driving what's happening in energy use in buildings. There is a national code, but it's not mandatory, and it has not yet been adopted by a majority of provinces and territories. So that is something that could make a lot of improvement. And then Canada does excellently for adoption of appliance and equipment standards. There are a lot of appliance and equipment standards in place. There's a labeling program. It could be improved a little bit. A labeling program, I'm sorry, I'm talking about when a manufacturer or a distributor or the endpoint of sale for an appliance or equipment has something on the packaging or a sign where the product is sold that tells the customer energy consumption about that product relative to other products that are available on the market. Next slide, please. So this is the comparison of energy use in residential buildings and energy use in commercial buildings. As I said, China does excellently in both. and Canada does better in residential buildings than commercial buildings, but and I honestly don't have a lot to say about why that is the case. I can speculate about building codes being something that is likely to improve that, but I can't say why these results are what they are compared to other countries, except for that we adjusted for weather, and the method that we used is a standard accepted method. And as you can see in commercial buildings, Russia does better. So I don't know the reason for that. Maybe some of you are buildings experts and do, but that's what we found. Next slide, please. Industry. So in the policies area, you have voluntary agreements between government and industry that involve commitments to improve energy efficiency in industry. But there's no requirement for energy managers, and there's no requirement for energy audits. Those two things could improve energy consumption in industry. This next one really surprised us. Canada was the only country to have 0 for energy produced by combined heat and power. And what we looked at was the percent of electricity consumed by industry that was generated by combined heat and power. And what we found was a really low reported number, and that number is reported by the Canadian government. And I don't know if it has to do with the type of industry that's there, or again, I would just be speculating as to why. But Canada's reported number was 0.1%, and the next closest country was 4% in Japan. The highest country was 27% in the UK, and the US has 17.5%. So I don't know what's going on there, but that was a really surprising result. And then investment in industrial research and development. This is clearly not a measure of energy efficiency per se, but when industry invests in research and development, it very often results in improvement in efficiency of processes. And so we allocated 3 points to this, and Canada got 1 out of 3. Next slide, please. This graphic on the left, as I mentioned, the report includes a whole section on historical U.S. performance, and so I included this graphic just so you could get an idea of the more detailed information that's in there on the historical basis. This line that you're seeing is for U.S. historical investment in industrial research and development, and the symbols all listed in 2009, because that's the year of data that we have for the other countries, shows you kind of where these countries, it's another way to look at where the countries are relative to the U.S. And I don't think you can see it here because Canada is tied with Australia and Italy. So at the 0.5% mark, you can't see it because of the color on this screen, but there's a purple X in there with inside the box and the green line. And the table to the right is the same information in a numeric form. Next slide, please. Transportation. This was an area where there's a lot of room for improvement, both for Canada and for the U.S. The average fuel economy of passenger vehicles received a 0 out of 3 possible points. It was the lowest of any country except for Australia, which was very close with 21 miles per gallon. In Italy, cars get 38 miles per gallon, and even in Russia, they get 29 miles per gallon. A policy that is likely to improve this would be to adopt more stringent fuel economy standards. That was another area that we ranked, and Canada's could be improved compared to other countries. the overall efficiency of freight transport in Canada was actually pretty good. That was measured in terms of energy use per ton kilometer of goods transported, and it's lower in Canada than Japan and France. Although Russia, China, and Australia all do better than Canada. And this is one of those areas where we have the data, but we don't know exactly why the results are what they are. What we speculate is that in Russia, Canada, and Australia, they have a higher ratio of goods that are transported by train, by rail, and that's a more efficient method than by truck. And so those countries do very well in this category. And then public transit. There were a couple of metrics that measured public transit. They totaled 7 points, and Canada didn't get any points in that area. And what we looked at was both federal investment in terms of dollars invested in rail relative to dollars invested in road. And then the other one that we looked at was who's riding transit, the number of trips that are taken on trains, buses, and coach relative to passenger cars. And that ridership of public transit was very low. Next slide, please. So this is two of the measures or metrics that I just mentioned, and they relate very closely to each other, and that is the vehicle miles. Oh, I hadn't mentioned vehicle miles traveled yet, but they do tie in very closely to public transit use. Since it's low and people are taking trips by car, this next metric that I'm looking at, the vehicle miles traveled, tells you, yes, we're taking a lot of trips by car, and we're also taking very long trips. So you get a lot of energy consumption in a very inefficient way. And next to that, I've listed, and this is one that we just talked about, which was the fuel economy of passenger vehicles. And that is to really highlight, you can see Canada has a lot of vehicle miles traveled and a low vehicle fuel efficiency as compared to other countries. So those two things in combination paint a picture where there's a lot of room for improvement. Also interesting there, I think on the left, is how high the U.S. is compared to anywhere else. It's just drastically higher. So a lot of room for improvement there too. Next slide, please. Just to quickly, I mentioned that we'll be doing this report again. We intend to update the research and publish a new report every 2 years, so the next one would come out in 2014. As I mentioned, this being the first version, there was a lot of data challenges, but also there's a lot of areas where we could do better on the metrics that we're using. For example, in the building codes, we looked at whether or not mandatory building codes were in place, and we looked at, for each residential and commercial, 5 different things that could be required in a code. And you got the highest score if you had all 5 things in your mandatory code. But we didn't look at the stringency of those things. So if a code required insulation, you got credit, but it might not be requiring a high level of insulation compared to another country. And we also didn't look at enforcement of building codes, which makes a big impact on how effective those codes are. Exchange rates, we used dollar exchange rates, but I'd like to include more. I'd like to include power purchase parity because it's a different way to look at these things and to compare across countries. And then if you recall looking back at the map, the third tier ranking countries all were the big countries, and the green countries were all small. So I would like to take more of a look at what role landmass is playing in the outcome of these results. And we'd also like to expand the report to include some additional countries. Next slide. I think that's it. So I would welcome any questions or feedback or suggestions for how we can improve the next version of this report. And I thank everybody for listening.
Thanks, Sarah. we do have a couple of questions, so I'm going to read them. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to type them into the chat section as we're going here. So hopefully, Sarah, you can address a couple of questions here.
Sure.
Okay, so we have one from Louis. It says, does the pricing of energy impact any of the scoring? So did you guys look at the pricing at all?
So the metrics themselves do not look at the pricing of energy, but certainly it will impact trade-offs and decisions that are made in terms of whether investments in energy efficiency are considered to be worthwhile. I know that Canada has a lot of hydropower, and so the benefits of investing in pollution controls there might be less than they are in a country like the United States, which has a lot of coal-fired power. And that those kinds of things also apply to decisions made about energy efficiency. But the price of energy is not something that was specifically measured or taken into account in any of the metrics that we looked at.
Okay. A second question here. The energy intensity of commercial, I believe that's commercial buildings, was that site-based or source or both?
So the way that we measured energy intensity of buildings was we took the IEA produces energy consumption by sector. So they have energy consumption for commercial buildings. And then we found the floor space of commercial buildings in the country. And we divided energy consumption by floor space. And then we took the heating and cooling degree days that all came from a central source. And we added them up for the 3 most populated cities in the country and took the average.
Dan Saucier
has left the conference.
And that's how we got that number. I'm flipping, so the floor area is the one number of the 3 that I just mentioned that came from individual research, country research, and I'm trying to take a quick look in our appendix, in our notes to see where the floor area came from for Canada. Let's see. That's table 18, right? Yeah. So table 18 came from Natural Resources Canada Energy Use Data Handbook. That's where the floor space came from.
Okay. We had another comment from Ian. He just said the latest building energy survey in Canada suggests that average energy intensity now is actually closer to 1.1 gigajoules per meter squared, including all energy. So a little bit better than perhaps some of the old data. We had another question asking if you had data by province or if it was just nationally.
It's just national.
Okay. And the second follow-up question to that was, does the federal include provincial or state funding? So that came from Efficiency Nova Scotia. If you guys are able to unmute your line and maybe give a little more clarification on what you're asking there, I'm not sure if Sarah needs that or not.
Jeff
has left the conference.
Yes, Efficiency Nova Scotia here. I guess our question was, when you talk about federal spending, is that also inclusive of regional government spending such as provinces or states? In Canada especially, certainly a lot of the provinces are quite active in energy efficiency, but I don't know how that stacks up in comparison to our federal spending in the same front.
Okay.
So this was, in my mind, the hardest metric to get good information for because it is not reported at the country level. And so what we did was we went and dug around to find programs and policies and the budgets for those things and add them up. So this is a really imperfect measure of overall energy efficiency spending. And we divided it by population and then left a great big gap between points so that we could leave a lot of room for error. And then to be more specifically responsive to your question, some countries, the spending is by states or provinces, and some it's federal government, and some it's utilities. Most of the spending in the United States is utilities. So we did attempt to include all of those things in the overall energy efficiency spending. It doesn't include the private sector, but it is intended to include multiple levels of government and utilities. That said, I am sure that the number could be improved, and if you have a place to refer us to get better data, we'd love to have it.
Thanks, Sarah. One last question that I'm seeing here. Are the formulas for each of the metrics available in your data sources?
Yes. In the report, we have data sources for all of it. Most of the sources are listed under each table, but in the case where we had to get country-specific resources, those are listed at the end of the document in an appendix. We have a very brief country summary for each country, and at the end of that country summary are table notes, and they list the resources for each table. And I think that the only thing I'm aware of that's not immediately very clear as to how we came up with the number was how we treated heating and cooling degree days. We tried to describe it's the process that I described already in the energy intensity of buildings, but and we tried to explain that in text form, but I think I could have done a better job of that.
Well, unless there are any more questions, I'm going to move on to our very last slide. I'm going to ask Dave Arkell to come back on the line here and wrap things up for us. Thank you so much, Sarah. This was wonderful.
Sure.
Dave?
Sarah, I want to thank you very much on behalf of people online here. And we have people spread out the country from British Columbia to Nova Scotia, so I know we all gained a lot from this. I think the message is that there's lots of opportunity here in Canada, and I would, from our research, we know that as Canadians there's been a lot of money and proven technology available, but the truth is most organizations haven't really fulfilled or done all the things that can be done going forward, and we believe there's actually 3 areas to focus on. Certainly technology will and has played an important part, but 2 critical areas that need to get strengthened and enhanced is better management practices and also information systems within organizations. And so as we go forward in the next year, we'll hold additional webinars where we'll have customers talking about some of the best practices that they've undertaken and the challenges and successes that they've had. And so as I suggested to you at the introduction, St. Mary's Cement, which is the first actually organization in North America to get ISO 50001, we'll be discussing what they've undertaken over the last 5 or 6 years and how they've been successful. So again, I want to thank everyone for their time, and we'll look forward. We'll be in touch. Sarah, thanks again. We really appreciate the information you shared with us, and we certainly have opportunities to proceed and get better in Canada. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone. I think that's it, unless there's any other questions that anyone has. I don't see any online. If you would prefer to have them answered offline, please feel free to send us an email or phone us, and we can get back to you on that. Other than that, again, thanks, Sarah, for your time and everyone for joining. That's the end of our presentation for today.
Dave Eastham
has left the conference.